Welcome to Politics Chat, in which I try to answer your questions about modern politics. The material that I want to talk to you about today essentially has two parts. I was writing today and there's something I really wanted to say, but there was only enough room for half of it. So I will tell you half of it today and half of it tomorrow during regular politics chat for Thursday. But let me start with some of your questions. The first is people have asked yet again how Donald Trump can seemingly change the law with executive orders. And I want to reiterate to you exactly what an executive order is, because people in the White House have been using executive orders since George Washington. All they are is this: think about your job and how you do your job is affected by who your boss is. That is, your job is still your job, but your boss might come in and say, you know, what I really want to do for this next quarter is emphasize this. So please turn your attention to this and do it this way. And then your boss might decide to take a different job, and you get a different boss who comes in and says, we really shouldn't be emphasizing that for this quarter. We should be emphasizing this. So you kind of shift your weight in a different direction. That's all an executive order is. It's the orders from the president about how to implement the laws that are in place. Now, Trump has been using them right and left to try and change the way the American government operates. And in many of those things, the courts have shut him down. And he's tried that recently, again, trying to override the Supreme Court's recent decision on birthright citizenship with an executive order. That's certainly going to be challenged. But they're not laws. They're not, there are many ways in which members of Congress or the president can make statements about things they believe or would like to see happen. And then there are ways in which those people have to give orders to the people who work for them. And that's all an executive order is. Now, if anybody wants to go down a little bit of a rabbit hole here, although we've had executive orders since Washington, they don't start being numbered until the Civil War. So I believe, this is off the top of my head, so somebody should check me on this, but I'm pretty sure it was Lincoln whose executive order was first numbered 1. But that's not because he was the first to give one. It's simply because they didn't think to start numbering them until then. There's a lot of big changes in the Civil War government that make them do things in slightly different ways, and that's one of them. One of the things I love about that, actually, it's always kind of fun to watch these things develop. All right, so that was one easy question. Now, another easy question that I will probably talk about again tomorrow is you've asked what on earth the Trump administration is doing in Greenland. And there have been developments on that front today. What appears to be happening, because, you know, as I've said to you before, this administration is a really odd one in that there's very little transparency. And sometimes you have to guess what the story is because you're finding the shape around the elephant more than you're finding the elephant. And so in this case, it appears a group that is affiliated with Donald Trump brought equipment, mining equipment, into, it's called the Greenland Energy Company. It is out of Texas. It's affiliated with Trump, and it brought mining equipment to Greenland. It's unclear if it had permits to do so. It looks like it might have had a permit that expired. That's the news this afternoon. But they do not have permission to drill. At the same time, the person that Trump has, a real right winger that Trump has sent to Denmark as his liaison, has said, oh, there's $1 trillion worth of oil under Greenland, and it will make up the difference from the oil that the United States can no longer get through the Strait of Hormuz. So there's real pressure to take over Greenland and open up those oil fields. Both Greenland and Denmark — Greenland is an autonomous island that is governed by Denmark, or that belongs to Denmark, have said, no, this is not going to happen. And Trump is certainly not going to do it. Now, a lot of you asked if this is a prelude to an invasion. There is no sign of that yet. But what is possibly, I'll say, going on is that the members of that company have made the calculation that if they go and start to drill and troops from Denmark and perhaps other NATO countries try to expel them, that the United States might come in and say that they're going to protect the Americans who are there. That's kind of a long shot. The United States has done so before. And just because you say you like my rabbit holes, I am going to go down this one that has probably nothing to do with where we are now. The way we got the link between American corporations and the government is this. During the Civil War, the United States Congress, for the first time in history, chartered a corporation that had the power to operate in territories, that is, organized territories. They're not states yet, but they're also not small t territories that haven't been organized. They're organized under the principles established by the Northwest Ordinance of 1795, which means they have a governor that's been appointed by the president and so on. But those territories didn't have the ability to charter corporations. So it was a real problem for the corporations. If they wanted to go through those areas, they needed actually to get permissions. And so because the federal government said it couldn't do that, it assumes the power to do that in 1862. All right, so we get the Union Pacific Railroad Act, and the Union Pacific Railroad Act assumes that the federal government has the power to charter corporations across territories. There's a long, interesting history behind that as well, by the way, but that I will spare you. Anyway, after the Civil War, in the 1860s, when the Lakotas, especially in the northwestern plains, up in the areas around Montana and the Dakotas, what are now the Dakotas, they were just Dakota Territory in that era, were fighting against the United States incursions into that region. The government transfers William Tecumseh Sherman, the guy who marched to the sea through Georgia and all that, out to the west to fight the Lakotas and their allies. And William Tecumseh Sherman's brother is John Sherman, and John Sherman is a senator in Congress. He's one of the key senators in terms of American economic policy in that era. And William Tecumseh Sherman is out there trying to fight these wars, and he is really, really frustrated. And he writes a letter to John they actually write back and forth a lot, to his brother John. By the way, his family nickname was Cump. His mom called him Cumpy. Sorry. He writes to John in Congress, and he says, listen, we have to protect the Union Pacific Railroad. It's being attacked by Lakotas especially, but by other people as well. And that in order to protect these corporations, and the people who are out here trying to lay railroad tracks, the government has to protect them using the military. Because by chartering that corporation, Congress made, and he says this, implied promise that it was going to use the military to protect that corporation. Because he said, we can't both protect the Union Pacific Railroad and the Bozeman Trail through Montana. So he says, we got to use the military to protect the both of these things, both the Bozeman Trail and further south, the Union Pacific Railroad. And in fact, that had never been the case. The Congress had never discussed that at all when they chartered the Union Pacific Railroad. I know because I've read the debates. But that idea that the federal government must use the military to support corporations really starts there. Then it goes through a number of incarnations throughout American history. But it is possible that the idea is to create some kind of a crisis in Greenland and then send in the U.S. military to do something about it. We're not there yet, is my sense. And I know that people have said that we are. Right now, we're not there. So nobody is invading Greenland at this moment. That's the story that's there, is this attempt to drill for this oil. And there's $1 trillion at stake, or so the Trump administration thinks. So, don't sleep on that one. But right now, anyway, that doesn't look like it's happening immediately. All right. Somebody else asked about the fact that the first thing that Blanche did when he got into office, Todd Blanche, who is now Attorney General, confirmed by the Republicans in the U.S. Senate. And if you watch me, you know I'm really unhappy about that. Somebody just asked, is there really oil? I have no idea. I'm not a geologist. Wouldn't surprise me. There is a lot of mineral wealth underneath previously frozen areas in the Arctic. And I don't know. It wouldn't surprise. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me at all. But I don't know. I'm not a geologist. Anyway, the Republican senators confirmed Attorney General Todd Blanche on Friday afternoon. No, it was earlier in the week. It was Friday. It was just after 4:00 in the morning on last Friday, if I'm correct on that. Like I say, I've been traveling, so I've been kind of messed up in a lot of ways. And one of the first things he did is he tried to extend the idea of executive privilege to cover all of the civilians that Trump has talked to. Really interesting there, because executive privilege is a policy designed to enable the president to get advice that is free, that somebody feels comfortable giving freely. That is often, when you're trying out new ideas, you want people to be able to speak freely without worrying about it appearing on the cover of the New York Times. And so the president can declare executive privilege to say, you can't learn what I talked to my Interior Secretary about, because that's an official advisor and I have to have some privacy here. And presidents have always tried to expand that because they want to cover more and more people to be able to talk to them. But the idea of saying that anybody the president talks to is covered by executive privilege is an extraordinarily large assumption of privilege. It will 100% be challenged in the courts. But what was more interesting about that to me was, I think it shows what I really hope to talk to today, and that is that Trump and the people around him are getting very, very, very nervous about the upcoming midterm elections and about the investigations and subpoenas that may come out of them and about what may happen going forward in the 2028 presidential election. And what I mean by that is this. If you were watching last night, Trump's close ally, Mike Lindell, the former CEO of MyPillow, the guy who was so deeply involved in trying to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election, lost a primary to become the Republican candidate for the governor of Minnesota by a lot, by more than 10 percentage points. That is the second Trump loyalist. Andy Ogles, a representative from Tennessee, was another one to lose a primary after Trump has explicitly endorsed them. All right, so hold that in the back of your mind. Also hold in the back of your mind that Trump's poll numbers continue to drop. Like the average polling number for him right now says that he has a 33% job approval rating. That is 33% of Americans like what he's doing. And that's an average. That's, some of the polls are even lower than that. Some are higher, but those are pretty firm polling numbers that numbers come from places like The Economist / YouGov that are both reliable pollsters, and one of the big pollsters that everybody trusts has also come out with that number. So his numbers are dropping. And of that, in that last Economist YouGov poll, 60% of the American people thought the president was not honest and trustworthy. 69%, almost 70% of Americans think things are out of control in the United States. And 53% of them think Trump is too old to be president. Now, again, I'm going to tell you the story, but I'm also going to tell you the backstory. There was today in the New York Times an op-ed from a doctor who was former Vice President Dick Cheney's cardiologist. And as many of you know, Dick Cheney had a bad heart condition that he ended up receiving a donor heart, and when his own heart gave out. And that doctor, a guy named Jonathan Reiner, said in an op-ed in the New York Times Trump needs to come clean about his health because his ankles are swollen, his hands are bruised, he's fallen asleep all the time, and the American people have the right to know if he is able to perform the duties of his office. Now, why is that significant? Somebody like me has been saying now for ages, dude is not okay, right? There's a couple of things here. One, I'm not a doctor. Well, except of history. So if you want me to tell you how he's going to fit in history, I'm your girl. But in terms of his physical health, I don't know. But second of all, I'm an independent person. I got nothing behind me, nothing institutional behind me in terms of what I do here. That was the New York Times. That is, it's one thing for someone like me to say, dude's not okay. The New York Times has now run a major op-ed, detailed op-ed saying, we don't trust that this guy is okay. That's a big deal. But then we're not really done. You probably know that Trump fell asleep in another White House event the other day, yesterday. And I'm smiling just because it's one of the few times I have some sympathy for the president, because I used to fall asleep in faculty meetings like clockwork. They held them at 3:00 in the afternoon, which is my lowest time of the day. And one of my colleagues used to time how quickly I fell asleep. So I have a little bit of sympathy for him there. But of course, that was not a norm for me. There's also the issue that's out there about the Iran war. This is a problem. Trump looks completely weak. He keeps announcing that, in fact, the Strait of Hormuz is open, and Reuters today reported that one ship a day has been going through the Strait of Hormuz compared to 130 ships a day before Trump launched this war. And at this point, the Iranians are just walking him like a puppy dog. They're basically saying, you're going to have to pay reparations. We're going to determine who crosses the strait, and so on. And the more Trump stands out and says, I'm in control of everything, the stupider he looks, right? And so one of the things this has done is it has really made a lot of people in the Middle East, a lot of negotiators and leaders in the Middle East sort of say, hey, what's America up to here? Like, we really can't trust the United States anymore. And that really became highlighted over, was it yesterday? I've lost track of what days. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu publicly broke with Trump and said, I'm not going to pay any attention to this Board of Peace agreement he insisted less than 2 weeks ago had solved the crisis in Gaza, which anybody who was looking at that at the time was like, come on. It says that Israel will come out of Gaza when Hamas gives up all its weapons. Well, neither side's going to do that. So, anybody could announce that, and it's not going to happen. And normally when Trump does something like that, Netanyahu would just sort of back off and delay, and everybody would forget about it, right? Like they did the first deal in Gaza. But in this case, he came out publicly and said, we're not going to go with that. And that has been interpreted in other countries as a real blow, saying that Trump really can't exert pressure, or at least is choosing not to exert pressure on Israel. And as a result, it's not at all clear that they can have any faith in anything that the United States promises. So where I'm going with this is that it appears that Trump is weakening politically. And you can see a couple other signs as well. A lot of Republicans have chosen not to run for re-election, but you are also seeing the White House counsel just step down. It's going to be replaced. And today, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said she is stepping down as well. Now, she just had a baby, so maybe there isn't a correlation between her second child. There may not be a correlation there, but people are leaving the White House in a really interesting way as it becomes clear that there's pressure from the White House to do things that might get them in trouble in the long term. And it was interesting that Jeanine Pirro, who is the head of the U.S. District of Washington, D.C., she backed away from that indictment that she had made against David Hearn, who touched the bottom of the reflecting pool, and they tried to charge him with a felony. And she backed away and said, no, the problem was not him. The problem was a bad installation. And Trump's been furious about that. They're talking now about trying to charge the guy with something else, which is bonkers. Trump just doesn't want to back off away from that. But she did. And it seemed pretty clear that she wasn't interested in losing her law license. It was really interesting there. You also had Peter Navarro out there screaming about it. And Peter Navarro might have slid a little bit too close to the wrong side of the law at the rate he is screaming at Pirro. So anyway, that was interesting. That there seem to be people walking away. And then, of course, we also have this thing about what came out over the weekend, the idea that in the trip leaving NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization conference in early July, remember there was a whole thing about Trump flew over there on the Qatari jet that had been a gift to the US, but then he switched to an older plane. And there was this whole thing about how there weren't enough defenses on the Qatari jet. So he switched to one of the jets that was used as Air Force One. And just to be clear again, Air Force One is not a plane. Air Force One is a call signal. So if Trump went up or the president went up in, one of the spotter planes out here that look for fish, it would be Air Force One. He wouldn't go up in it, but it's the call signal that is Air Force One, not the plane itself. So there are 3 planes in the US that generally are used as Air Force One. And he went into one of those from the Qatari jet. But what we learned over the weekend is that he didn't actually go into the jet. He walked up the stairs and then went into a catering container with some of his closest aides. They were transferred into a catering truck and moved to a different small plane. And they left behind the press corps, the White House press corps, and some of Trump's closest advisors, like Secretary of State Marco Rubio. So Trump took with him his loyalists, Dan Scavino, Walt Nauta, the people who have been in on his really close machinations and who stayed with him in the 4 years in between his terms. But they left behind the press corps and a lot of White House aides. Now, people have asked how on earth that could happen. There are 2 doors into Air Force One, into the old ones. And the press goes in through a different door than the White House than the president does. So they could do it without being seen, I'm sure. But then the planes went up, or everyone saw Air Force One go up, and that plane that now no longer had the president on it. Remember, the call sign is attached to the president, not the plane. That plane went up with the press and the aides in it because there had been a credible threat that the Iranians were going to shoot it down, were going to try and assassinate the president. Meanwhile, Trump is on a different plane that traveled first apparently without a call signal, and then with a different call signal that did not mark it as Air Force One, like one of the many planes that are out there. And what that did is it set up the White House press corps, the White House press pool and Trump's White House aides as a decoy to be killed in place of Trump. And I have to say, of all the things that he has done, this crosses such a huge freaking line that, and I can already hear the comments, people saying, well, didn't Clinton do that? In fact, Clinton was in a zone that was already dangerous. So the press corps knew that. And they informed, the press pool has somebody who's in charge of it every day. They informed that person that Clinton was not going to be on the plane. They did tell them that. So in this case, at least from what I've read, so in this case, they literally set the press up to be killed. and Trump's aides to be killed. And the sheer cowardice of that, and the things they could have done, they didn't have to send the plane up. They could have moved the president in a different way. They could have told the press, so they had the option of making alternative plans. There were any number of ways they could have done that without forcing the press to be an unwilling decoy without knowing what was going on. I find that mind-boggling that anybody would set up somebody like that. All right, so all of these things are, I think, showing the Trump weakening, and he is also causing real pain in places that we are not used to seeing pain. And that is, for example, and I'm going to talk more about this tomorrow, the attempt to build his big wall across the border between Texas and Mexico has led to extraordinary environmental damage in Big Bend National Monument. And that's a huge, beautiful monument in Texas. And there's been such an outcry against the building of the wall that it looks like that might have been taken off the agenda, but the bulldozers are in there making roads and doing all sorts of things, while people who were talking about monitoring immigration say, why don't we just use drones? They're much cheaper and they won't hurt the environment at all. So why on earth are we spending billions and billions of dollars to destroy Big Bend? So people in Texas are furious about the loss of Big Bend and people's land there around it. There is also real problems in the military in the news now, where sailors on the USS Abraham Lincoln have been deployed for so much longer than they should have been in a military operation that there have been reports of sailors self-harming, including trying to jump off the ship. It's a 60-foot drop, which is really, really, really dangerous at best. And you can see people in the military and military families in this outcry against what's happening to their people. And that's, again, a place where Trump would tell you he's popular, but this is not a good thing, first of all. And then you are also seeing this real backlash in the United States against a number of the things that Trump is doing. But before I go into more of that, what I'm trying to do is set up the idea here. There are many ways in which he is weakening. You are also seeing people grabbing as much as they possibly can, as quickly as they can, because I think they're worried about losing the control of at least the House of Representatives after the midterms. So we learned today from Jonathan O'Connell and Sarah Blasky of the Washington Post that the renovations that Trump is making to the White House campus, that is the different things he's doing, the East Wing that he wants to do, that's been stopped by the courts right now, and so on. I hope you're sitting down. This is going to cost at least $927 million. And guess who is going to be paying for it? Primarily taxpayers. Okay, so they're doing that as quickly as they can. Trump is saying it's got to be done before the next election. That's where the next inauguration is going to be. And by the way, he's been really pushing the idea that he's going to run in 2028. People are very concerned about that. He's not going to be in a physical condition to run in 2028, although one does wonder if he is trying to set things up for one of his sons. But you can see him trying to grab, it's another $1 billion that he has grabbed from the U.S. taxpayers. Some of it will be paid for by private money, but that's our money. And then Scott McFarland of McFarland News reported over the weekend that the payment for that, the place they're getting that primarily, is from the National Park Service, the money that we have put into the National Park Service through our fees and through our taxes. And they've spent $323 million has been devoted to Trump's White House, another $100 million to the stuff he's had going on the National Mall, for a total of $423 million. The amount he has spent on the White House is a 5,000% increase over the $7.5 million that Joe Biden spent on maintenance to the White House. And the that money, the $423 million that they have taken from us for Trump's vanity projects, McFarland points out, is more money that was allotted this year to Yosemite, the Grand Canyon, Grand Teton National Park, Golden Gate National Park, the Statue of Liberty Complex, Mammoth Cave, Zion National Park, and Joshua Tree combined. The money that's supposed to be going into those incredibly popular parks for people's protection and, upgrading the trails and taking care of some of the $30 billion backlog that Trump's own Secretary of the Interior has identified is going into Trump's projects around the White House and the National Mall. Grab as much as you can. There has also been, in the last couple of days, a letter from the Representative Jared Huffman of California, who's the top-ranking Democrat on the House National Resources Committee, and Maxine Dexter of Oregon, who's a top Democrat on the Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigations, to the CEO of Energy Fuels, it's a company, noting that he and the board chair, but he especially bought the largest amount of company stock purchased by an insider in the company's history, just a few days before Trump announced that he was slashing the size of Bears Ears and Grand Staircase Escalante national monuments. I think they're national monuments, maybe national parks, national monuments, I think. National monuments, Bears Ears and Grand Staircase Escalante by 90%. And what's under that land is uranium mining, and Energy Fuels is a uranium mining company, and they have been advocating for that land to be opened up since at least 2017. And they said to to investors that they had a really good relationship with the White House, and the Department of Defense gave them a $725 million loan to expand their uranium mining processing plant earlier this year. And then they bought all the stock in the company, personally bought all the stock in the company just days before Trump announced that he was cutting that national monument by 90%. And so the Democrats have said, we think this is insider trading and we are doing an investigation of it. But to me, it's just a microcosm of this whole idea that they're turning the wealth of the United States, not the cash, but the wealth, things like our natural lands and so on, into cash and putting it in their own pockets. If you want to read more about that, Wes Seiler, who produces a newsletter called Wes Seiler's Newsletter, kind of easy to remember, wrote a lot about it yesterday, I think it was. So they're doing that, and they are increasingly trying to grab as much stuff as they can while Trump remains in office. So I'm going to leave you with a couple of things. What I really wanted to talk about today, and I sort of wrote all this and thought about it and didn't make it to the second half of this, is they're also trying ideologically to grab as much as they can. And I'll fill in that tomorrow. But I want you to leave you with a couple of things that you asked me about. You asked once again, like, why are so many Republicans going on about this? And I've been going along with this, and I've been throwing my hands up and saying, they were cowards. They're hoping it'll go away. And all those things I think are true. But somebody threw something at me the other day that I think also has truth to it. And that's that Trump really billed his election in 2024 as a permanent political realignment in the United States. This is it. This is a realignment. I've got Latino voters on my side. I've got, all these new voters, young people on my side. This is going to be a permanent realignment. And so you got to stick with me or you're going to lose out on this permanent realignment. You'll never get reelected and so on. And a lot of people bought into that and they went full MAGA. They kind of threw everything over and went full MAGA. And you can see this in somebody who had already slided that direction, but somebody like, oh crap, I'm drawing a blank on her name now. I can see her. She's from New York. She was third Republican in the House. Anyway, who had been fairly moderate and went down the MAGA route. But what we are seeing now is that that was wrong. That, as people like me were saying all along, Trump was promising everything to everybody, and it was not going to be possible both to side with the white supremacists and the Latinos who have now turned against Trump in huge numbers. And it was not going to be possible to give tax cuts for really old rich people and screw over young people and then keep young people on the Trump train. It really wasn't going to be possible. The only people he was going to be able to continue to keep on his side were the white supremacists, because they were going to be able to recognize, and possibly the evangelicals, although he's losing a lot of them as well now too, because they understood that they weren't going to get this kind of power under anybody else. So that might be a reason that some of the Republicans have stayed with him. But now they've really painted themselves into a corner, because as MAGA becomes less and less popular, and as Trump's numbers drop, as his behavior becomes more erratic, as prices continue to rise, because without that oil coming through the Strait of Hormuz, there's no way to see what else will happen except prices going up, especially since the U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve is down to its dregs. That ship has sailed. MAGA certainly seems to be coming apart in a lot of different ways. And what we're seeing come together is a new kind of larger Democratic tent. And people ask me about that too. I don't have time to go into that now. But what I'm hoping to do is to write about some of this material tonight, write about the ideological challenges tomorrow, and then on Friday do a big roundup of where the Democrats are right now. So if you read me, which is on Substack or Facebook, Substack is free, by the way. They will ask you for your credit card. You don't have to put it in. You just can't comment unless you put in your credit card, because I couldn't police that otherwise and get out the trolls. So if you read me, you will find those three things there, unless something else big happens. But I will also be on here tomorrow during my usual politics chat time to cover some of that material. But what I will tell you once again is, you cannot speak up enough right now, especially if you care about places like Big Bend. Make your voices heard on these issues, on protecting the vote, on pushing back against the corruption going on everywhere, but especially in the Justice Department, because those things really, really do matter. If you watch, I've been doing all these interviews with electeds, and I always end with, what can people do? And they always say, speak up. We tally who calls our offices. People change because of the things that you call and say. And, one of the things that, just to do a big win here, the Office of Management and Budget under Russell Vogt, one of the guys who wrote Project 2025, was hoping to put through a rule that said that political appointees would get the final determination of how federal grants would be handed out, all federal grants, but especially scientific and medical ones. And they have put that off. They haven't dropped it, but they have put that off because there was such an outcry against it. Public opinion matters. If you'd like to tune in live, I record these chats on Tuesday and Thursday at 6 p.m. Maine time on both my YouTube channel and my Facebook page. If you want to hear more from me, I write Letters from an American every night. It's available on Substack and on Facebook, and the audio version of the nightly letter is available the following day wherever you get your podcasts. And finally, on Saturday mornings, I talk with Dr. Joanne Freeman, the historian of the early republic, professor, and dear friend, about history and politics. We call our talks What the Heck Just Happened, and you can find them on YouTube. Politics Chat is produced by Lauren Westfall, music by Andrea Von Kampen.